thank you, KSI, of arranging this. This is the first time we're doing it virtually, a new norm. And good to see on screen many of my CFOs, including Tan Sri Dato, Rahim, etc. Yeah, so nice to be here. And I'm honored to chair this session. When I look at the panel speakers, I'm not sure whether I'll try to do my best. So we have 4 questions to sort of answered, and we have 4 very distinguished speakers. And first of all, can I call upon Dato Stewart LaBrooy, Chairman of Area Group of Companies, to share with us his opinion on this sustainability topic. Now, ESG is probably the buzzword where you see every day in the paper, in addition to probably after pandemic and all those wordings. So can we put our hand together, and I will welcome Dato Stewart LaBrooy on behalf of everyone to come on stage.
Thank you very much, Wai, for the introduction, and welcome to all the moderators, other panelists on this panel. Very interesting topic. ESG, or sustainability, is now coming to the forefront. The pandemic has surfaced a lot of issues which we've actually put on the back burner for many, many years, but now they're coming to the forefront. I would say the pandemic is like all of us swimming in the ocean naked and waiting for the tide to go out. And now we're getting caught out. The ones who actually performed are the ones who are going to do very well. The ones who haven't are going to be punished. So when you talk about sustainability and you go to the topic, how do you measure it? I mean, a lot of people here probably are running big companies and have this issue with sustainability. I never forget once when I first started working in Axis, and the Bursa and the Securities Commission have to make a sustainability statement. We didn't have a clue what they were talking about. And I think the same problem applies to many companies today when they tackle or struggle to find out how they should actually measure or put a sustainability statement together for their unit holders and their stakeholders. So anyway, let's talk about ESG now. Can I have the first slide up, please? Here we go. All right. So the 3 things, E, S, and G, okay? Environmental, social, and governance. Okay, what does this compose of, okay? E talks about CO2 emissions and efforts to reduce these emissions, energy and resource efficiency, and waste management. S, the social part of it, talks about human rights policies and implementation, labor standards and conditions, diversity and inclusion. And G is the governance, involvement in corruption and bribery, quality and diversity of the board, and shareholder rights. Coming back to the S, this probably has been something that's been in the forefront of our corporate world in the last few months, when we are downgraded to Tier 3 by the US State Department's Trafficking in Persons report. It means we're at the bottom of the list. And it's brought into focus a lot of our companies who have large migrant workforces and their treatment of those people. Many of these companies are now coming under the microscope in the countries where they're exporting to. And this is going to hit us quite hard. And don't forget, also in the property business, we do have large migrant people working in the construction industry. Again, the same issue applies when we talk about ESG. This is something that the pandemic has focused big light on, because now they're talking about worker accommodation issues, the ability to transmit diseases and very tightly packed residences and things like that. It's all changing. It's brought a huge transformation in that particular industry. Next slide, please. Here's some facts, okay? It's a new priority for residential properties in Asia. Most developers are looking at it very, very seriously. So, because the world is facing threats from climate change. Look, America's burning to the ground in this last few months. You know, it's been horrendous. The heat wave that's hitting both the Arctic Circle as well as Siberia and the US. Every year it seems to be in the north they'll be burning down, in the south in Australia they're burning down in the next part of the cycle. So building and construction sector is amongst the world's largest polluters. Please remember that. Okay, our sector is responsible for 39% of greenhouse gases emitted globally. Okay, sustainability for property developers, however, just means facilities that are friendly to the environment, ensure the well-being of residents, addressing design needs from the pandemic while being responsible to local communities. However, sustainability goes far beyond that. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, I'm going to show you an example of a company which I think is brilliant at the ESG approach. I won't name the name of the company, but it's a global logistics provider. And, you know, they say it requires a deep commitment to environmental stewardship, social responsibility, and good governance, and an aspiration to be a leader in your industry and beyond. it is not a compliance statement in the annual report. Sometimes I read annual reports and look at the compliance statement. It looks like they ask someone else to write it for them, okay, and stick it in there so it looks nice, okay. ESG leadership can give a lot of benefits to your company. It drives innovation. It expands your value proposition to your customers beyond real estate, deepens your relationship with your customers, employees, and communities, and other key stakeholders, attracts and retains your top talent by building strong, inclusive cultures based on common values, and actually reduces your capital costs through ESG-related financing, such as green bonds and sustainability-linked loans. Just pausing on that one point there for a minute. Nowadays, you're finding that banks will be tying ESG components to their lending. They'll lend you find it easier to lend to companies that actually have a good ESG track record, or they'll finance buildings that actually are ESG friendly, as opposed to them not. So by building the cheap and cheerful buildings anymore may not sort of get you the financing you need in the future. And this is becoming a very, very big part. Maybank's leading the thrust at the moment, and other banks are following. Next slide, please. Also, climate action. You need to catalyze the adoption of efficient and renewable technologies that drive down climate-damaging emissions in your buildings. You need to construct and operate innovative, sustainable, and resilient buildings. The move towards precast buildings are going to be the future. Getting a whole bunch of Indonesian workers to build your factory or you build your buildings anymore is not going to move forward anymore. They're going to get expensive and difficult to find. So they have to find new ways of pivoting, and this is actually going to benefit the planet and people that want to achieve good ESG ratings. And it unlocks career pathways for your chosen developments and facilitate the supply of quality homes across the economy. Next slide, please. I have limited time, so let me push through this quite quickly. So where you need to focus and deliver results. Number one, environmental stewardship. You must decide from the beginning that your company is going to manage, operate sustainable buildings, reduce carbon emissions associated with construction, operation of buildings. Mean very, very energy efficient air conditioning systems, good ventilation structures, as Tansi said earlier, very important in buildings. LED lighting, low energy impact, water recycling, everything goes together and delivers, and basically using very sophisticated management systems for your building. Minimizing construction and waste generated during development of your buildings. The precast buildings actually solve that problem for you. Protect local watersheds and resident biodiversity. Next one is social responsibility. Advance inclusion and diversity within your business and across the industry. Develop buildings that promote the health and well-being of your customers. Deliver a world-class employee experience for your people. Contribute to local communities by unlocking employment opportunities and supporting charitable causes. This seems to be something we're all very good at. Every year you'll see pictures and annual reports of companies buying Kentucky Fried Chicken for some orphanage and making a big deal about it. Can you have the next slide, please? And the last one is governance, of course, very important. Accountability and transparency, and through appropriate checks and balances. Employees and your partners constantly follow your high standards of ethical business practices, mitigate risk and embed resiliency across the global operations and assets, protect health and safety of your employees, contractors, and customers. Health and safety for employees, contractors, and customers. We talked about how you're going to open up this economy. I said months ago that the only way you're going to do this is to make sure all the workers are actually inoculated, vaccinated quickly, and getting back to work. This dragged out too long, so you get the stop-start thing that happens because not all the workforce has been vaccinated. The focus should have been on the economy first and then the population next, because the economic engine has got to run. This has not been the case. So actually we're struggling at the moment in trying to keep our businesses running. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to stop after this slide. I'm going to talk about delivering four. You need to deliver for your four key stakeholders, okay? Who are they? Employees. Foster talent and a strong corporate culture, okay? Customers. Your organization is always looking for new ways to create value for your customers. And sustainability efforts are no different. ESG solutions deliver turnkey energy efficiency and renewable energy solutions to help your customers source and retain labor. Your community is your stakeholder, okay? Need to take pride in being a good neighbor and partner in communities around the world. Investors, sustainability is essential to your value creation strategy, delivering quantifiable benefits to your shareholders both today and for the long term. And your continued advanced reporting and disclosure practices, okay? I'm going to stop there because I hit my 8 minutes. I think YY is going to start turning off my microphone in a minute. So I'll stop here, YY, and we can come back to some of the rest of the presentation later if we have time, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dato. I was listening intensively to your speech. But Dato, there's a question for you which we will answer at the end of the after all the speakers has delivered their piece. Yeah. And next, can we have Miss Phang Cheng? Cheng is the Executive Director, Governance and Sustainability from KPMG, Management and Risk Consulting, Sdn Bhd. Over to you, Ms. Phang. And on behalf of the panelists and everybody here, let me welcome you. Thank you. You are on mute. Cannot hear.
Yeah, sorry. Frequent mistake everybody makes, forget to unmute their mics. Apologies.
That's a new norm. That's a new norm.
That's very true. Very true. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all keeping well. Nice to meet you all, and nice to meet you, YY, and fellow members of the panel today. My session is going to focus very quickly with regards to where ESG is being taken and what sort of innovation are we talking about in the real estate property development sphere. So I won't go through, I won't gloss, I won't go very much in detail, but hope that the participants will be able to ask questions. So next slide, please. So when we talk about ESG considerations, and what Dato said is very true, when we look with regards to environmental, social, and governance issues, what we find with a lot of companies implementing ESG considerations is that they look upon it as a reporting requirement, and therefore they do not take it very much into detail where it comes to how to integrate it into your business as usual. So what we essentially need to see from reporting companies is an integration of ESG or consideration or non-financial risk or environmental, social, and governance risk is basically considered non-financial risk into business as usual, into strategy development, into risk assessment, and then into your business as usual. One of the key requirements also is that you understand what your stakeholders are saying, your customers are saying, your regulators are saying, what the banks are saying, and how you need to improve your ESG reporting and your ESG management and performance to meet these requirements. But what we're also going to be focusing on is where the challenges and where the need to consider the ESG risk as we move further down the horizon, as we address things like climate change, as we address things like social issues, that becomes important. Next slide. I won't go through in detail, but you will see that in terms of challenges and opportunities, when we come to development and property development, there is a multitude. Dato has already touched upon it with regards to the social, but we also have serious design and considerations, material considerations to take into account as we move forward and as we design for low carbon developments and low carbon properties to take also advantage the promotion of biodiversity that is required nowadays. Next slide, please. So when it comes to innovation in design, we need to think with regards to, what was talked earlier in panel one, the use of technology, right? What sort of platform do you want to use? What sort of smart infrastructure? What are the environmental issues? How are you planning to input things like lighting, digital signage, and security? So but the main thing is you have to decide what you want to do with your property, how do you want to develop it, and you follow the Plan, Do, Check, Act, which is basically you need to have an objective, you need to have a plan to move forward, you need to have matrices, and you need to monitor, and therefore you will be able to demonstrate how you're meeting these requirements. Right, next slide, please. One of the key things that we cannot ignore is that there is issues with regards to climate vulnerabilities, as we have seen over the past year, and Dato has touched upon it with regards to climate change, floods, very, very high heat. Our weather is changing. So the risk in which we face with regards to property development is also changing. Where you have land now, or your land banks now, you have to consider whether it is viable for development or not, or is that going to add more capital expenditure and add to your operational expenditure and therefore increase costs to your customers. These are important considerations. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we help our clients with is to try and understand where your risks are with regards to climate change. And we do this through scenario analysis, where we take you through the what if scenarios. And therefore, after this, you should be able to understand where your risk is, what your opportunities for development are, what are the areas that you need to improve on, and what sort of technologies you need to take on board. And these are important mechanisms for you to consider as we move forward, because as has been mentioned earlier already, investors, financiers are beginning to look at where their financial risks arising from climate change is. And this is very important because this is being driven primarily by Bank Negara, as well as the global legal requirements out of the EU, and as well, as America has already invested back into the Paris agreements and all of that. This moving forward, the impact on climate change and where access to funding is becoming a serious consideration in the very near future. So things that you can think about where you talk about innovation and moving to the new norm. Next slide, please. Things like looking at the circular economy. I apologize. This is in PDF. You will get the slides. And when you talk about circular economy, people have in Europe especially have used circular economy to drive decarbonization. Looking at where you can identify, taking a life cycle thinking, looking at where you design from beginning, from design right up to end of life, and where you can reuse, reduce, and recycle. And this is very important because waste adds to climate change, and the use of material adds to climate change, and the use of materials and the source of the materials from which country you're buying from has a social risk, because there is such things called modern slavery and human rights aspects risk as well that's attached to it. Next slide, please. We also look with regards to design innovation, where out of Europe, and especially in Europe, where there is a serious consideration, as well as in Australia, there has been moves into designing zero carbon buildings. And these are things that are very exciting to me. And if you take a very life cycle approach and rational approach to design, use of materials, and looking at carbon emission per building, you will be able to move yourself towards zero carbon building. So the issue with regards to urban gardens and all of that will be designed as part of the package. Right. Next slide. I want to show with regards to a design which has been shown in the Netherlands, and it is the world's first really zero building. And the amount of thinking and the amount of consideration that goes into it with regards to where the energy is coming from, where the waste is coming from, investment and innovation and new technology is immense. And this is something I think Malaysian developers needs to start looking at with regards to where the innovation is going to come from. Because what they also found is where you have the fluoridate building, you have no fuel, no electricity, no water, no sewage. So it's essentially zero carbon and zero waste as well. Right, next slide. So what I also want to take raise awareness with regards to property developers and all is the consideration of energy mixes. Don't think of only one type of energy mix. Think of a mixture. You can have solar panels. You can also have combined heat and power plants and things like that to generate energy at different parts of the property, and therefore this will help to drive sustainability on an environmental and social and customer acceptability aspects. Right, next slide. So we've also got in Malaysia the smart city framework. So Malaysia is quite good in the sense that we have already the framework that is available. We have grants that's available, and all it needs is just a holistic thinking about ESG and in terms of design and what you want to meet your customer requirements and to design for the future. I will leave the last my last slide with yes, we will share the slides in a while after this. My last slide, if you will move forward. Right. In terms of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is, what is our current state? Where do we want to move forward? What are the opportunities? What are the risks? And what do we need to consider? Right. For a lot of our clients, where we move with regards to considering the future state, that there are opportunities in cost reduction. There are opportunities in design innovation leading to cost reduction. We also need to be more agile as a company, doing business as usual in terms of the way that, as Dato said, in terms of the way that we have designed buildings and all, and the way that we build buildings and all. We need to change, because the dependence on foreign labor and the risk that the use of foreign labor gives for each company in terms of reputation is immense. And I can tell you, we have a gamut of clients and all of that, and also industries in Malaysia, because of the downgrade to tier 3 by the US Customs and Borders, has risen the risk with regards to ESG risks, right? We, of course, in Malaysia and also globally, we need to fill in the skills gap. And that's really important because at the present moment, we don't have enough people who understand ESG, green design, innovative green design, and also the bravery to move forward in terms of adoption of innovation and design. So this gap needs to be overcome, right? Obviously, with this forum, we are really engaging the industry, and then we also take a deep dive look as to what is happening within our organization so that we can actually move forward. Thank you. Over to you, YY.
Thank you, Cheng. Yeah, there's a question for you in the chat box, so we'll answer that later. Everybody is very enthusiastic to ask questions to the very distinguished panel speakers. Next, we have Akitek Zarim bin Bakar, Deputy President of Pertubuhan Akitek Malaysia, or the Akitek Association. On behalf of everybody here, I will welcome Akitek Zarim to address this. Yep.
Thank you very much, everybody here and fellow panelists, and thank you very much for KSI and FIAPC, okay, to invite us, me, in delivering a talk on this. Okay, can we have the slides, please? All right. Yeah, first and foremost, I would like to just quickly move on. I'll try to make this as short as possible so that we can have more Q&A. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right, so, oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. I think you have my own slides. Is it possible for me to share?
While we are waiting, for Ms. Phang, right? For Dato Stewart LaBrooy, your question was, is an urban farming on top of the building? For Ms. Phang, the question for you is there a regulation by the government on carbon trading? And how does this work? Will the presentation slide be shared? I think so. I can't really read the information while Zoom, understand. Are we ready for Akitek Zarim? I just wait for a while. And Ms. Phang, there's another question for you on renewable energy by the government is very low. What can we do about it?
Yeah. Do you want me to go first, or would Dato?
No, I think I think Dato's slide should come very quickly, because if we allow Q&A now, I think we cannot finish the session at 12:30.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Yeah.
But I thought, since I have the question, and I know all of you are very well prepared, but I thought I'd just read it out first. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think while we're waiting, just a quick comment on some of the issues that are being raised. ESG certification, I don't think it exists. I don't think you can get a certificate for ESG. Am I right, Ms. Brown?
Maybe we should propose one. So the question asked is whether ESG certificate should be part of the conditions for issuance of the CCC, the CCC. That you need to comply with the ESG before a CCC can be issued.
ESG reporting is very much a voluntary requirement, so there is no certificate that applies to it yet. But there are moves being made by the IFRS to actually develop a sustainability mandatory requirement or ESG requirement along the lines of the IFRS. So that might be mandatory in that sense. In Europe, ESG reporting is already mandatory along with assurance. So the only certificate that you can actually get is an assurance certificate at the present moment. Assurance statement.
Assurance statement, thank you. But to be fair, right, all of us here are not really direct developers, maybe with the exception of Dato Stewart LaBrooy. So while we can talk about ESG and all that, I mean, the practical sense, right, I'm not sure. We can talk about it later, whether you know, what would the developers say? You know, is there a cost impact with this new norm and all that lah?
That has always been a consideration, but it would be good if we could discuss that in a while. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
We have quite a bit of time. We have quite a bit of time because we started a bit early. Yeah. So I'm just waiting. My screen.
The slides are up apparently.
Yeah, the slides are up. I can see it. Yep.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much. So
thanks.
I can move on then. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. So for this session, as pointed out by many by the moderator and what do you call it? We have 4 questions to ask, so I'll try to address some of it inside this presentation. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I shall start, embracing the new norm. This is our main thing that we are facing at the moment is the COVID. Definition of what is, I would go on the Universal Sustainable Design, UN. Okay, and then I will address what is the new one. I will define it. I will see quickly what we say about pandemic, and I'll talk a little bit on digitalization and new approaches to development. Next slide, please. Okay, so definition of the new norm or sustainable development goals is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own. So to this, I will follow the Sustainable Development Goal, SDG. You know, as we know, it has been going on for quite some time and is supposed to end in 2030. Okay, and some of these slides, okay, you will see that there are 17 life-changing goals, but I have only, how do I say this, related to what is development all about. Next, please. Okay, so we can see here, you know, everybody, not only in Malaysia, but all over the world, you know, especially in the construction industry, we have lockdowns, we have CMO, EMO, and all knots, you know, and it's causing a lot of delays. And, you know, it also related to limited resources available. Many sites, as you can see, are forced to close. So we need a new solution. We need to sit down and recourse. And because of this, millions of people are experiencing untold misery, suffering as the virus overwhelms our body. The rich and the poor are all forced to consider almost every aspect of the way we live in. Here, you know, you can see this. We are mostly locked down in our own house, not able to move anywhere. All right, so this actually affects the construction site and all involved in the construction industry. Next slide, please. Okay, so part of the recovery is to promote green recovery and also to improve efficiency of water infrastructure and, you know, food structure and so on. Next, please. Okay, so we come to the next solution, digitalization. As we all know, we are forced to digitalize the way we work. There is no physical interaction or very little. You know, some of us are not even able to go to our own office and so on and so forth. So we have to look the way we work. You know, this includes not only our way, but how we interact with all the stakeholders in the industry. And we have to work smarter. Okay. Next, please. Okay, so with all this, okay, we need tools. And these tools are already available. Some of us, the bigger ones, the bigger companies have already jumped into this, you know, but a lot of us are still grappling with this. You know, we talk about fabrication technology, we talk about artificial intelligence, big data, augmented reality, 3D printing, and as we know that whether we like it or not, this is here to stay. Digital is everywhere. Okay, moving up, next please. Okay, so because of all this, we need to see how we approach development. Okay, we need to see how we interact developers with architects and consultants, with contractors, subcontractors, and even the public sector. We need to see this, and we need to see how to adopt new technologies in order for us to work. For example, some part of us are already digitalized. We are submitting our submission drawings online, but we still need the local authorities to give us the hard copies to them, deliver to them, and the fact that they don't open also makes it a problem for us. Okay, so this is some of the things that we need to look into. Construction goes on site, but we can't go on site, so it's a little bit of mismatch here. Okay, so we look again, some of the construction technology that is impacting the industry, as posted out. Okay, we have data, we have drones, we have BIM. Okay, we have virtual reality, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, and we have IDD. IDD is basically integrated design delivery. Next, please. Okay, so what are the key sustainable things? So what is important here, we as consultants and as everybody in the industry, we have to look at what is important is to give back to society. Here is, we can't always start looking at profit margins alone. Okay, we have to see what we have to sacrifice in terms of giving back. Design for the community. So we have to include more things like communal space and so on. And we have to give also, we have to help the community to build up resilient in case of another pandemic coming in. And we do not know what it is all about. In terms of design, we are looking at almost the same thing: energy efficiency, passive cooling, recycled materials, waste treatment, smart lighting, and many, many more things that we can put inside here. Next, please. Sorry. So next, please. Okay, so next is what are the opportunities that are for sustainability? Okay, so the opportunities are very wide. Okay, what we need to see is new products, ways to add value, whether the value that we give includes self-maintenance, meaning the cost of maintenance is less. Again, down here, you can see all these things that we as architects have to design for. Okay, energy efficiency, low operating costs. This is in the case of high-rise residency and so on. We have to make sure that whatever we design is environmentally reduced. Okay, we have to see ways together with the developers, how to increase the property value after they sell. And then we have to make sure that the residents there are living healthier and happier. Next, please. Okay, so what are the key trends that we see? Okay, first and foremost, we have to look at the things. We have to go back to basics. And then we have to look at green policies, how to treat the environment. The cost and capacity is the challenges that we face. And one important key that we need to look at is affordability. Even in the high-end property market, we have to make sure that it is affordable. Next, please. Okay, yeah, and finally, what are the solutions? How can we develop sustainable? So this is where we come in. We have to think outside the box for solutions. We have to have greater collaboration with everybody in the stakeholder. And we have to make sure that our products are green and services are also green. And some of these things that you can see here, deliverables are like IBS, prefab or PVC. You know, we have to make sure that they are zero carbon. Our homes are ventilated, naturally lighted, use of solar power. We have green walls. Okay, we have greenery. We have to also maintain, like for example, rain collection system. So with that, I think I hope that I'm still within time, and I will hand over to you back, Oi. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Architect Abdul Zarim, for your very interesting presentation. And we have last but not the least, most of us know her, Architect Lillian, Group Vice President of VERITAS Design Group. Lillian, over to you. Then after that, then we can sort of visit the Q&A, which is already have quite a few in the chat box. They are supposed to post it in Q&A chat box instead of chat, but it's okay. We can manage the questions. We can read it from the chat box later. Over to you, Lillian, or yours. Thank you.
Thank you, KSI and FIAPSI for this opportunity to present my views among very esteemed speakers who are all leaders and gurus in the industry. I think my topic given was to talk about embracing the new normal, and that certainly we have all been doing with gusto, I believe, and I heed also Tan Sri we can use advice that it's a time of great opportunity. Okay. Well, the unexpected scale and unraveling of this global pandemic shows that COVID-19 will become endemic, and other contagious infections and natural calamities will continue to arise in the future. Increased urbanization and population density makes the impact and scale of these disruptive events even more severe than before, and recurring periods of community infection, quarantine and lockdowns will force us to rethink how we have previously organized our lives, our domestic life, our work life, and even recreation. Many affected nations are compelled to review policies and plan for increased contingencies and more strategic links between public and private healthcare. Public health management should also be extended to integrate with the planning of community spaces in the city to promote healthier urban environments in the new normal, as henceforth health and wellness will be a priority for everyone, individuals, businesses, and for the country. In envisioning the post-pandemic living and the new normal, architects and planners would need to simultaneously to assess the urban planning of our cities, our streets and civic spaces, and as well the more micro level needs of the future home, the future workplace, where we, since our new normal will require us oftentimes to work from home. This is especially pertinent for high density, high rise housing, both in the cities, and as we know, high-rise housing is also very prevalent in the suburbs. At the city scale, the pandemic has made it glaringly evident the need for more accessible public green areas that can serve its immediate neighborhood. Our several large parks in KL, beautiful as they are, will need to be supplemented by more accessible neighborhood green areas to help sustain local communities during such times of lockdown and public health crisis conditions. We would need more pocket parks, open squares, more shady sidewalks that everyone, young and old, can easily walk and safely walk every day to and from their homes and from their flats, not just for recreation, but as part of a more sustainable urban lifestyle that's resilient to the ravages of pandemics and natural calamities. As you can see, the COVID-19 pandemic showed up our lack of resilience, and on the Bloomberg scale of resilience, Malaysia is ranking 51, even behind India. And that's, I think, a warning sign to us that we do really need to make changes in how we plan our cities, how we plan our homes to allow us to be more resilient to these times. Next. Next, thanks. Oh, okay. I did want to touch on this, if we can go back. One of the things, if we look at some of the studies that actually had been around, and perhaps we do not pay enough attention to them until, you know, the pandemic has made it more compelling. If projections had already long been there, that with rising sea levels, we will be facing a lot of inundation along the coast. In fact, and these are quite of concern, since these are our food producing regions along the coast. As you can see, that the areas marked in yellow and orange are areas prone to floods, tsunami, future tsunamis. And these are areas where we grow our food in Kedah, through the coast of Perak, as well as through the coast of Selangor, Kuala Selangor, all the way to Pulau Ketam, Port Klang, Pulau Indah, Sekinchan area. So that's another thing that not just addressing pandemic, but I think we need to, at the same time, really look at climate action with more commitment. Okay, next. This is a detail zooming in on projections of sea level in 2030. This projection was done about 15 years ago. And at that time, it was already projected that a good part of Klang, for instance, Banting, Carey Island, Pulau Indah area would be inundated, would be below sea level in a very, very short time of by 2030, which now is just a decade away. So these are great concerns, and architects and planners, I think, before we rush into development, need to ensure that these global infrastructure planning is also in place, because I do believe that the industry tend to sometimes work as islands where everyone's doing development in the land banks, and architects will just zoom in onto their own buildings, when indeed the role of larger local plans, structure plans, local plans, and master plans need to be done to address these much more global issues that are coming up that can't be addressed in the local, in one plot, in one development. Next. Okay, so I believe that it's not just about recovery, but about a recovery that will make us come out of it to be more resilient, make us build more resilient cities, resilient buildings. Next. And of course, we have to work at starting from the level, the more micro level of within the home unit, within the planning of the unit, all the way through the condominium, for instance, the housing block, and all the way through the urban scale. That needs to be addressed at 3 different scales, and which means all the stakeholders from individual citizens and homeowners, local authorities, all need to act together in concert to be able to effectively build that resilience, to be able to sustain the future challenges. Next. I think we can skip that, maybe a bit too detailed. But we're looking at simple planning that we can adopt very quickly in post-pandemic. Hopefully we'll all be soon back to work within a couple of months when vaccination levels have reached herd immunity levels. We are very, very quickly some low-hanging fruit that we can easily, immediately adopt, certainly in design, would be look at the planning, the internal planning of residential developments. You know, I think during the pandemic, we're all quite used to having deliveries and doing online shopping, and suddenly you saw that that there was a place to receive things, and and to, not to say receive, but almost intercept things. So I think in the future, we will certainly need to look at larger receiving concierges, perhaps even automated concierge, and they do exist, that can be, that will be a norm, I think, in residential developments in the future. In fact, mailboxes should probably be put out of existence, since we have, we now receive all our bills online, and hardly ever do we receive a Christmas card in the mail nowadays. Next. I think there have been also many proposals we've seen in the pandemic to sort of intercept visitors and deliveries right at the gate to mitigate community transmission. And that's certainly something to be done. I think previously we were also focused on physical security, but this will now be extended, obviously, to hygiene, to maintaining hygiene and sanitizing the boundaries between the public area and the more private residential area. Next. We can skip this. I think that's a bit quite detailed. But I think some of the wisdom is not just, of course, we are all eager to embrace, now that we're forced into higher levels of digitalization and embracing technology every day. There are still many lessons, I think, that we have left behind from traditional architecture, time-tested wisdom of vernacular architecture that should be revisited and reappreciated as we plan our homes today. I think in the increasing dense urban housing, a balcony is now becoming a luxury, and this perhaps needs to be the first and easy thing to do to change, is to ensure that in the new normal, every home should have its own outdoor space. When we are locked in, I think one of the things we really wanted to do was just to get out for fresh air, and to have your own outdoor space would seem an essential part of living in the future. Balconies, anyway, only form 3 to 8% of the total GFA of a unit. And I think the local authorities should also do their part to incentivize the provision of balconies by excluding covered balconies, because most balconies we do need to be covered from the rain, and we do have quite torrential rain here. These should be, I think the local authorities can do their part to exempt the calculation of balconies from the GFA, so that everyone will be more likely to receive, to get a home with their own outdoor space. And planter boxes at the balconies should also be counted as part of the green areas. I think in some local authorities this has been practiced, but we certainly hope that this will be practiced more across the whole country, just so to encourage every unit to do its part in the greening. And it's not just the developer has to produce and comply at the beginning, and it may not be kept and maintained. So I think everyone needs to take responsibility, and what better way than to parcel it out to everyone to contribute to the amount of green space that we should create within a living environment. Next, please. And of course, we are very, we are a family-based community, and balconies obviously would need to be child safe. So in our office, we have spent quite a bit of time in the last months and year designing new housing that have generous balconies, but are fully secured by sliding screens, sliding grills that are built into the railing. I remember when growing up in KL in the 60s, public housing all had balconies, and you could see a lot of life on the balconies of public housing. I remember my uncle used to always sit there for hours and hours, just sitting on the balcony. And it was sometime in the 90s, in the early 90s, I recall, with some sort of misplaced, perhaps, sense of urban beauty, that public housing were actually asked to turn all the balconies inwards so that we wouldn't look like a developing country. and have laundry hanging out on the face of the building. So I think now it's time with the lessons from the pandemic to look at it in a more practical way. Simply said, the balcony is really like the lungs for the home. And we should review these guidelines that forces balconies in public housing, PPR, to be internalized into into a poorly ventilated air well. They are not even balconies that you can use. They are basically utilitarian yards for washing and drying, so it's really time now to revisit some of the housing guidelines. So these are very simple things. It doesn't need fancy technology. That should be an easy and quick start to improving the quality of housing, to make it more resilient and sustainable to face future pandemic times. Next. Of course, we have all also learned that, you know, we always hear this popular pitch about live, work, play, you know, for for new residential developments and townships. But little did we know that live, work, play will all need to happen within the confines of your own home unit. So I think a lot of work architects and interior designers can do to make it more practicable. We will often see that you have mom and dad and also the kids with the online classes all fighting for the Wi-Fi and the quiet space to do their respective work. So I think in the future, this needs to be some simple planning that the homes and apartments especially would need to be designed such that they can convert part of the open area into an itinerant home office or a home classroom, an instant classroom for the kids. The home really becomes the refuge for living, work, classroom, playground. Next. I think we have seen during the past months, our public health, our healthcare system getting really stretched to the seams. And I believe that the care, such as quarantine, should be shared again and can be done quite easily within the community housing. For instance, the car park and the podium car park, for instance, are usually quite well ventilated places that we can set up temporary quarantine, community quarantine rooms or isolation rooms for families who may have family members needed to be quarantined, and it would make it a lot more easier for the patients to be supported by the family rather than to be brought to a large overcrowded hospital with stretched staff or quarantine center. So I think these flexibility of the common spaces should be a feature in future developments, such that your topmost level car park, for instance, should have high ceilings so that you could convert them to be used during times of pandemic or other calamities, to be used for isolation or even recreational purposes. Okay, next. Another thing that we had seen was that even though facilities are quite provided in all developments, most of them were closed during these times. And perhaps that it would be wise to look into, instead of this grand, large, centralized type of facilities, that we should break it down a bit to avoid overcrowding and to be able to manage the use of this such that they will continue to be of use, of beneficial use to the residents during restricted periods. Next. I wanted to show this because maybe many of us may not know it, But last year, the highest prize in the architecture world, which is the Pritzker Prize, was awarded to some architects who had done this amazing restoration or refurbishment of public housing. And all they did really, when confronted, when asked to upgrade, it is exemplary that instead of tearing down and rebuilding, what was proposed was basically adding balconies to the building. The balconies added were around 3.8 meters, a room-wide type of balcony, and the total cost of the whole refurbishment and upgrading, which almost doubled the space of each unit, cost roughly half as much as if it were if we tore it down and totally built it anew. And the amazing thing also, the residents continued to live in the unit through the time of the refurbishment, because each unit took only around 2 weeks, 12 to 16 days, to install the new structure for the balcony and the upgrading of the glazing and railings. So it's, I think there is wisdom if we're talking about sustainability, to look at also how we can work from the structure of housing that's already dense. A lot of public housing from the 60s and 70s are already 17, 18 stories high and quite dense. And there is some wisdom as shown in these schemes here that you could effect the upgrading of public housing very quickly at lower cost without tearing down totally and building all anew. Next. This also, of course, this is also this is a view of the development, which is in Bordeaux, before and after. You can see every unit now enjoys a balcony and have some outdoor space, which certainly would contribute quite a bit to the improvement of the unit. And you can see how much larger the unit is, almost 50% more than the original space for some of them. So I think it is also something to look at because there are many developments in the city, not just about new. We should not just be focusing on new buildings to be better designed for the future new normal, but how to upgrade the existing buildings. And this looks like a very workable, practical, and lower cost approach to improving housing stock in the city to be more resilient to future pandemic conditions. Next. Okay, I think also generally many of our standards, which always take a long time to compile and approve and upgrade, they all tend to be also compliance oriented, and I think we should start to have more livability and resilience factors. Okay, perhaps we can move faster. I think everyone's anxious to go for lunch. I also wanted to touch on some of the urban replanning that needs to be revisited, and this is a good opportunity to review them. Is that while there has been quite a lot of efforts from the local authorities to green the city environment, some of the strategies and regulations need to be rethought. For instance, the perimeter planting. Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, in fact, already suffers from island planning where every building needs to have a driveway around it. And this is the biggest impedance to pedestrianizing the city and making a better pedestrian environment, because you will always come across a driveway with entries and exits. Therefore, we do hope that this is a chance to rethink how we can optimize the greenery. We're not saying to reduce it, but just to relocate it at the street side instead of at the edges in the shadow of the buildings where they won't grow, and in such narrow strips that they can't support good large size planting. So for instance, this may require some adjustments to the layout next, such as moving drop-offs to the side and to be able to put priority on walkability in the city. Next, we'll move faster. Got too many slides. The other aspect I wanted to touch on about making cities more resilient and sustainable is
Lillian, if you could just speed up so that we can have, so that you won't be the only one who is will be suffering from not having lunch.
Okay, I think I'm on my last couple of slides. I just wanted to highlight this part.
Sure,
which is in the Kuala Lumpur Climate Action Plan that just came out recently, that the carbon emission, the major source of carbon emission really comes from vehicular transportation, 55%, and the rest, residential is only 10%, commercial 24%. So buildings 10 to 30, 40%. So that the lesson here is that besides looking at ways to make our buildings more sustainable, we really must put emphasis on increasing the use of public transportation. Next. So we do need to increase the ridership because Kuala Lumpur actually has a very mature network already now. In fact, I would like to point out that it has more kilometers of railway per million people than Seoul, but our ridership is only about 25%, whereas in Seoul is 70%. So we've got a long way to go. And this is the biggest area that we need to work on to be able to reduce our carbon footprint. I think that probably would sum up. We can just run through the slides very quickly. I think a few more. Next. Yes, some examples also of flood mitigation in Singapore, which is integrated with creating parks. Workplace also not to be forgotten as we talk about housing. They also need to be breathable. We basically need to open up all our spaces, whether the workplace or living space. And I believe that's my main message, is to try and open up, not to underestimate good old-fashioned and practical means while we embrace digitalization and technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian, for within the time give us such a comprehensive presentation. And before I move to Q&A, I would like to thanks again to the 4 very distinguished panelists. Dato Stewart LaBrooy, Miss Phang Cheng, and Akitek Zarim, and Lillian Tay. There are quite a lot of questions, and we have about another 10 minutes, so that we can all, somebody asked, is lunch provided? Yes, but unfortunately KSI cannot deliver to 300 packs. So the lunch is provided either by your loved ones at home, or Grab, or Lala Move, or probably or some of us may have to cook after this, or maybe we skip lunch, or maybe you have salad in front of you. Whatever, what a new norm is, whatever fix, just do it and enjoy it. So I will quickly go through the questions. Some of them have been answered. I go to the sequence because there's another question in the Q&A, but most question is in the chat box. Let me address those chat box questions first. Dato Stewart, how are you? I know you're well. Can you address on urban farming on top of buildings, regulations, etc.? Mute yourself, please. Oh, I mean, unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. Thanks very much. No, I think the question is quite relevant. A lot of people talk about urban farming, and urban farming has 2 forms. Either it's in commercial type buildings or it's in residential buildings. I saw a slide earlier on where I see someone putting a greenhouse on top of a building. That would work because then there's no danger of leaks and things like that. But if you do a flat roof design and put something to grow on top of it, the chances are that over time it's going to leak, especially in this climate, where you get torsional twisting in buildings and they start to crack, and internally there'll be this amazing amount of leaks happening. So I think urban farming, you have to address the sustainable issue of leaks and quality of building when you try and do that. Other parts, of course, they basically look at, when they talk about urban farming, is taking abandoned buildings and turning them into growing vertical farms inside with lighting and everything else, hydroponics. There's a lot of technology there. We can actually grow products within the city in the buildings that have been abandoned and let rot. So there's one way of actually putting urban farming in there. To put farming into a home, a lot of people actually grow things nowadays. They're getting quite innovative. But putting on the roof does actually create a problem. If you have a set of flats, who enjoys the benefit of the roof unless you have some kind of collective running the farm on top of the roof as part of the the joint management corporation managing that part of the problem. Who gets it? Who plants what? Who harvests what? Becomes quite a difficult thing to actually address. But I think it'll come in time. People are actually moving more towards growing their own products, and people are showing an interest. The pandemic has moved everyone to becoming part-time gardeners and part-time farmers. They're finding great joy in actually growing their own produce. And there's a big demand, for hydroponic sets and plant seeds and things like that. Again, this thing has actually changed attitudes tremendously on how we approach living and the quality of our life. Urban farming is something that architects can design into buildings, but again, I always say the problem with flat roofs is that they're not the most energy efficient structure, because they do a lot of heat inside the building, and B, they do leak over time.
Thanks, Dato. I hope they answered the questions. There was a few questions for Ms. Phang, but they have been answered by her just now on the certification and the regulations. The next two questions together is for Architect Abdul Zarim, if I could read out for you. Is it good to revisit UBBL to include elements of ESG in property development, as well as CIDB and PAM should produce design framework and guidance document with respect of ESG? What say you, Architect Zarim? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think a direct answer to all these two questions is yes, we should revisit. The UBBL is constantly being reviewed directly or indirectly. So getting it past the parliament is something that is very difficult, and it takes a long time, and it goes through a lot of processes that we need to go through. So I think, yes, in the meantime, all this suggestion of getting a guideline out on the ESG and so on is very much welcome. It's just that we need somebody to start it moving. Thank you very much. I think I'll try to answer as short as possible to allow others to also answer. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There's one question here from the Q&A box, Freddie Lee. With regards to architecture design, I noted that many developers are trying to put out landed house with all kinds of intricate facade and different material. Question, how can these houses adopt IBM?
I do believe it's IBS.
IBS is, yeah, okay. It's written IBM, okay. So I probably, it's written IBM. I'm not an architect, so probably you are right. Do you want to answer this question?
Sure, not Thank a problem. You. Okay, yeah. So the question of IBS is that there are many things. It's only in Malaysia it is called IBS, which is Industrial Building System. And the fact that other countries also use similar, they call it PPPC, which is pre-production, pre-design, volumetric construction. Modular construction is also another. So this is also, as pointed out earlier by one of the speakers, is that, to save time and money and quality, this should also be considered seriously among the developers, because at the end of the day, we cannot forever rely on the foreign workers, the Indonesian workers, the Pakistani workers, and whatever workers that we have at the moment. I think whether we like it or not, they do contribute quite a lot to the pandemic cases, because they live in very squalid housing and quarters. One particular house may house like maybe, what is meant for 5 can actually, house up to 15 or even 20. It's just the nature of how they try to save the money and send most of the money back home. So I think, yes, this, as far as the what do you call it, the different facade and so on, yeah, this is the beauty of IBS. Only we consider only the structural element, the foundation, the slab and beam to be IBS. So the what do you call it, the opportunity to be creative is still there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Akitek Abdul Zarim. Now we have 4 more minutes, and I just wanted to pose this question. I hope within all the comprehensive presentations, we found answers to the 4 questions, which was meant to, the objective which we meant to fulfill for this section. But I have a very practical question to ask, which I asked earlier. Now, all of us, or most of us, or me, I'm not a developer. So we can talk about ESG, talk about sustainability, talk about green. But, at the end of the day, the developers are affected. What do you think can make it work? Maybe they are suffering because of pandemic, because of the new regulation, because of the SOP, because of the liquidated damages, whatever, what do you think they can do? What do you think they can do? Is it practical, and how can they take the first step to this ESG implementation? Can we open up to all 4 panelists and maybe have your view? And due to time limit, maybe we can try to be very concise. Can we have Miss Phang, first?
Yep. Thank you, YY. I was
Yeah.
just going to say, we work with quite a lot of property developers, REITs, and all of that as well. The main thing is that the first step is to understand what your customer wants. What does your market want? Number 2, understand what are the constraints coming from your bankers and your requirements. Number 3, design what is suited for what your customer wants, what is suited for tailored to the environmental risk, while taking care during your construction that you do not take on additional social risks. So looking at that, you need to obviously have an appropriate governance structure to ensure that all these risks are being managed. So the old way of thinking about property development, that is being approached and all of that, has to be streamlined, has to be made more efficient, and also design for the environment is very important in this case, because customers are wanting energy efficient homes, they want biodiversity, they want water efficiency, they want an avenue comfort of knowing that their energy that they are getting is helping the environment. So that's where the market is moving, as well as addressing climate risk. And with the climate risk for a lot of property developers, you have to understand where your future risk is coming from, where are your land banks going to be affected, so that you can take appropriate action. Thank you.
Cheng, and can we have Dato Stewart LaBrooy to touch on this? Yeah.
I think one way of approaching this, the thing is also about standards, and the standards are, green buildings. We have standards. We got LEED standards. We've got, certain companies globally, very big logistics firm, they will only build LEED Gold buildings in their portfolios. They will not build anything else. And their clients who come into these buildings are multinationals. They pay for the extra. Here we have a mentality is build them cheap and build them quick. And then hopefully that the tenants will move in. But it's becoming more apparent that if you really want to get the 5-star clients to move into your buildings, you need to basically produce green buildings. Again, for housing, that means it's another issue altogether. If housing standards meant that you needed to have a minimum green standard for everything you build, it'll force the issue of sustainability into the architecture. I'm sure all the architects are just all primed, ready to move into a green building era, but it requires legislation from the government that, buildings are not allowed to be built unless they comply with a minimum green requirement. If that doesn't happen, then you're going to have people cutting corners, having a limited amount of open spaces. It will not comply to a green agenda. So if you really want to be serious about doing this, you've got to start from the top down, and it's got to be legislated that all buildings in future have to be built to green standard. The developers produce more expensive buildings, and people have to pay for it. Simple as that. But it means that we don't produce rubbish after that.
Sorry, if I may interrupt, YY, sorry. Very quickly, legislation is one way of doing it. But if you look at the Australian companies like Lend-Lease and also Stockland, they have taken this on board, in terms of life cycle thinking, design for the environment, innovation, looking at their delivering to their customer requirements. They did it before legislation requires it, right? They did it because they saw a niche in the marketplace which their customer base was asking for. So legislation is one. Developers themselves must be willing to take that step, the innovative step forward to realize the potential that they have in terms of addressing ESG issues within the way that they currently do things. Yeah, back to you, YY. Sorry for that, Dato.
Thanks. You're absolutely right. Sorry,
Maybe now we can get the two architects. Architect Zarim, you want to go first, and then followed by Lillian. We have only 1 minute.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short. I think this green in Malaysia, we have green GBI, which is Green Building Index, and more developers are jumping on board, and they see the benefits of actually doing green. And as competition becomes more and more fierce, that's what the developers are going to. So yes, I see the move to green buildings a norm. In fact, I think we have certified, GBI has certified over 10 million square meters already. Thank you.
Thanks. And Lillian, do you want to say something with the last 30 seconds?
Okay. Well, I mean, it's well and good to say that, but I do believe that we actually need to make it mandatory. If it's mandatory or incentivized, meaning that you get to build a higher density, you get to build more apartments if you are building green, there's nothing more effective than that. Left to their own, it's not so easy. Of course, once the company, like the big companies, the MNCs have made it a corporate policy, that's good. And I do commend, companies like SB Satya, Sdn Bhd that it's a corporate policy, so all their developments are green. But a lot of the developments is also happening among smaller developers that may not have that commitment. So I like in Singapore as well, they had made it mandatory for buildings and developments around above a certain size. So I do believe that we need to take that route, because with the challenges of higher costs because of the supply chain disruption, I don't think that having a greater sense of the wellness will necessarily reform the tendency of the production process to put that extra front end cost to green buildings, because there is certainly a front end cost, and it's very, very hard even now to retrieve your tax rebates. Like years later, I've seen only a green cost certificate almost 7 years after the building completed. So I do believe that incentives or even mandatory for certain size buildings is the way to go. And it's not just green, there are also wellness certification and other standards that can be used. But I think that we have to force the hand sometimes.
Thanks, Lillian. I think ESG is a topic which we won't be able to avoid. Probably is a question of the timing. With JL, where I work for, every clients, right, whom we work with now, ask us, what is JL's ESG policy? Even if to help them to sell something, right, they ask us, what is the ESG policy? And we had one in place. So it's something which probably we cannot avoid. It's a question of how we can start implementing it or start looking at it. I find the session very interesting. I learned a lot from the 4 panelists, and I hope the attendees here have get something, learn something or enjoy the session. Thank you for being with us. Thanks to KSI again for organizing this, and to the 4 panelists, Dato Stewart, Ms. Phang, Abdul Zarim, and Lillian. Thanks for be with me in this session, and thank you, KSI, for inviting me to chair this session. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Stay well, stay safe.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.